Hello there, and thanks for joining us. I'm Park Howell. You may have a purpose-driven brand, but do people really know what you stand for that is much greater than just your offering? You'll learn how to craft that story strategy on today's Soulful edition of the Business of Story. Our dad, Keith Howell, had a quiet, soulful, personal brand, and he taught me one of the best lessons in sales when I was 11 years old. He said, "Park, a deal is only good if it's good for both parties." Now, I witnessed this sentiment in action one sunny Saturday morning way back in 1972. I was glued to our TV set in Woodinville, Washington, watching the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour when my dad interrupted me with the sale of my sister Melody's blue Schwinn bike.
Starring that Oscar-winning rabbit, Bugs Bunny.
And also starring my fast-feathered friend, the Roadrunner.
She had graduated to riding horses, and so we needed to get rid of the rig. Being the only girl of 7 kids, none of us boys would be caught dead on her Schwinn. Our dad was running my 2 older brothers to baseball practice when he charged me with the sale. "Park, a man and his daughter are coming by in 30 minutes to look at Mel's bike," he said, staring into my 11-year-old eyes that were absolutely transfixed on Wile E. Coyote's latest fall from the Monument Valley cliff. He grabbed me by my little shoulders, pulled me a smidge closer, and said slowly, "We want $14, but we'll take 10. "Right, got it, no problem," I said with complete confidence, finally awakening to this great endeavor he had just bestowed upon me. Money was an important thing in our household, given my parents grew up in the Depression. They never missed an opportunity to stress honesty, integrity, and fiscal responsibility with us. He left with my 2 older brothers, his words resonating in my brain, "We want 14, but we'll take 10. Sure enough, as the Roadrunner beeped his way safely into the sunset, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? I thought, annoyed. In slow motion, with one eye trained on the opening strains of Scooby-Doo and half my brain driving my feet, I moved to the back door. There stood a strange man and a girl. "Can I help you?" I asked, as if they came totally out of the blue. "Yes, we're here to see the bike," he said. "Oh, right." There in the breezeway was the freshly waxed Schwinn Speedster leaning seductively on its kickstand, with its chrome handlebars all a twinkle. My world snapped into focus. The weight of my sales goal landed squarely upon my small shoulders. As the little girl walked over and caressed the seat, her father turned to me and asked, "Is your dad home?" "No," I said, clearing my throat to begin negotiations. "He asked me to handle this sale." "Well then, how much do you want for the bike?" he asked. I realized my dad hadn't talked price with this prospective buyer on the phone. I deftly sized up the situation. This guy was totally flying blind. I had him right where I wanted him. His daughter was obviously smitten with Mel's bike. The only thing between her joy and him being a hero was his wallet. What an opportunity. Pops is going to be so proud of me. My older brothers will look upon my brilliant salesmanship with respect and admiration. Mel will revere me as the polished horse trader given the deal I was about to cut. Once again, my dad's words rang through my head. I stepped up, and with a cajoling smile of a used car salesman, I said, "We want $14, but we'll take 10. My offer shocked the buyer. You could see it in his face. Then an odd thing happened. His shock suddenly turned to delight. I mean, it took the keen eye of this savvy salesman to detect it, but it was there. Then it hit me, like a bank safe crashing down on Wile E. Coyote's head. I just revealed our pricing strategy. Dang, the tables had turned and we both knew it. "Tell you what, kid," the Roadrunner said, "I'll give you $12 for the bike." I leaped at the offer with a big grin followed by a tiny handshake. Wounded but wiser, I retreated to our family room to retrace the transaction, feeling lucky to have gotten the $12. All these years later, I can tell you that what I learned pedaling my sister's blue Schwinn bike was vastly more rewarding than what I earned. Dad laughed and applauded at my honesty. The buyer, who most certainly could have taken advantage of a cocky 11-year-old, had the integrity to meet me halfway. And the transaction proved one of our dad's greatest business morals. A deal is only good if it's good for all parties. I couldn't have made a better sale that day. I was reminded of this anecdote after interviewing today's guest, Jason Harris, who is the author of the new book, The Soulful Art of Persuasion, The 11 Habits That Will Make Anyone a Master Influencer, and how what you stand for is vastly more rewarding than what you're selling.
The Soulful Art of Persuasion is about brand building. It's personal brand building and business brand building. So it's kind of woven a lot of work that I do with clients and how I've built a business, but also it can be applied to people on a personal level because, as we talked about earlier, persuasion is something we do in our personal lives and we do in our business lives when we're selling.
Jason is the co-founder and CEO of Mekanism, an award-winning New York-based creative advertising agency. He works closely with brands through a blend of creativity and performance in an approach they call Soul plus Science. Mekanism, which is spelled with a K, Mekanism, clients include iconic brands like Peloton, Ben & Jerry's, Jose Cuervo, Alaska Airlines, Charles Schwab, and OkCupid. Under his leadership, Mekanism was most recently named Independent Agency of the Year by The Drum and ranked by the Effie Index as a top 10 most effective independent agency in the United States. Mekanism has also been named to Ad Age's Agency A-List and twice to their best places to work. Today, you'll learn some of the 11 habits that will make you a master influencer by, number 1, being just your weird self. Why you should never be closing during sales. The pole of positivity. And why your purpose brand story and how it illustrates what you stand for will make you stand out among your competition. Plus, he shares a simple but profound exercise that matches what you're good at with what you care about to help you find your personal and professional purpose in life. All that and more on this edition of The Business of Story with Jason Harris. Hey, Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You know, I haven't talked to an ad agency leader in quite some time. You know, congratulations on all the success of Mekanism and, you know, the great work you've been doing out there as an independent agency, which is really odd because so many agencies are swallowed up by these big conglomerates anymore that it's really nice to see highly successful independent agencies like yours. So congrats on that. Where are you coming to us from, Jason?
I'm from New York. We've started the agency and if anyone's looking it up, it's Mekanism, but it's with a K, not a CH, because when we had 3 other partners and we started about 17 years ago, we came up with this name, Mekanism, which is really how, you know, when you think about a watch, kind of how the different parts put together to make you be able to kind of function and tell time. That was the idea behind the agency, is to have different departments that really collaborated and worked really high functioning together. So we came up with this name, Mekanism, and then the CH was taken, and we didn't have the strength to argue for a different name with the 4 of us. So we said, why don't we just make it a K? And so it's Mekanism.com with a K. That name, actually, the K gives it a little edge, and it served us well. So it was kind of fortuitous.
You in the agency world, that is one of the hardest businesses to be in, and I speak to that from personal experience, having run Park & Co., my agency in Phoenix, for 20 years. Really loved it for those first 10 years when we were focused on more traditional advertising, TV, radio, print, outdoor, that sort of thing. Really felt like that was fertile ground for brand and business storytelling and so forth. And then, of course, the digital world came in and disrupted all of our lives. And Jason, I don't know about you, but I see very little creativity online in digital marketing. And that's one of the things I think that drove me out of it, that it just felt like it was such a crowded marketplace, the digital world, that it was nearly impossible to do interesting creative work. Maybe I'm using that as an excuse because we were having a hard time with it. And clients were spending a lot of money with us and weren't getting a lot of results. I just didn't know what to do with it. How have you guys grown up in the digital world?
We started a little bit later than you did in starting the agency. And when we started, we consistently pivot the agency like probably every 4 or 5 years. So certainly I love the big splashy brand work and the big storytelling and the big traditional work, which we still do a good amount of, believe it or not, because I still find that big ideas and big storytelling ideas for brands, they're still an endangered species. And no matter what media you're looking at, you still need to know what is the core of the idea for the brand you're working with. And then how do you tell that story through different channels? So I think while the channels have changed, that's still the idea of what's the soul of the brand, what does the brand stand for, and then how you tell that story is still fundamental. Like, I don't think that's changed. But we really were able to keep up by, we had to create a performance department where all of our work could be measured. We have a whole platforms department that is on the cutting edge of all new social media. We have a pretty advanced media department. So I really did it by hiring experts in new media, but keeping the foundation of the company the same, which is good strategy, good ideas, and then it trickles into the different channels. But it's a hard game. It's highly competitive, but I think brand marketers, CMOs trying to tell their brand story, they still realize they need something to hold on to for the customer, and they need something that resonates with the brand. And you could do influencer marketing and you could do social media hits, but you still need to come back to one. Like, what is the idea of the brand? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to communicate? And that's still, from the beginning of the industry to now, is still paramount. So we've kept with those fundamentals, but then hired experts around those fundamentals.
Jason, you said that ideation, coming up with the big brand idea, is an endangered species. Yeah. And why is that? Because you and me, we have been and are in the advertising world. We get paid for our big ideas. And yet, why do so many agencies seem to struggle with coming up with that one big idea that then gets articulated in different ways through all the different mediums?
Well, I think you can have a lot of hits today by doing collaborations with other brands or artists. You can have, almost like bands, right? I know you're a musician, and I know when you think about music, you can have a hit. You can have a brand that does a stunt or an experiential thing that gets a lot of earned media and is a hit and gets the brand noticed. But then it comes and goes. You still need the foundation of what the brand stands for among creating hits. And I think a lot of agencies and brands, they think about it as hits versus what's the career of the what's the arc, what's the career, what kind of music do we want to make over time, what do we come back to? And so, I think a lot of our brand partners realize that, and they want hits, but they also want the big story and the soul of the brand and what does the brand really stand for. So, I think a lot of agencies can create hits, but they can't create the long value of the brand, the long-term value of the brand.
Now you're looking at that overarching brand narrative, and in addition to that is what you're talking about between your performance department, your platform department. So you've got what the brand stands for, you've got the soul of the brand, you know how to articulate it on a grand scale, but then you've got all these little channels that you need to be able to translate that overall brand narrative to and have a lot of these hits along the way. And the hits are still supporting that overall brand narrative. And that's really the key here is people have to have patience, don't they? And play the long game with your brand story.
I believe in the long game. But I talk about it in my book, actually. But you got to play the long game. And it really comes down to some basics, fundamentals. Whether it's your personal brand, whether it's a brand you're working on in the advertising space, but you need to have simple, clear, consistent message. And when I think about the best brands in the world, and you close your eyes and you think of the one thing they stand for, there's always that one heart and soul of the brand, like Disney stands for magic, or the North Face stands for exploration. So whatever brand, a brand we work on, which is Alaska Airlines, it's all about care. So that's the one thing that we established with that brand is they're the most caring airline. And when you think about that simple soul of the brand, you can think of where you can take that in different channels because it comes back to that one thing. And so we're always trying for our brand partners to stand for that one thing. And when you have that, everything becomes so much easier. And when you don't have that, you're kind of chasing ideas and you're chasing hits and you're trying to just come up with ideas, but there's not a bedrock that it comes back to. So you always try to think about it as it should really be one word. It should be one thing that the brand can stand for. And from there, you can tell a million different stories, but it always has to come back to that one heart and soul of the brand. So that's kind of that's our shtick. That's what we pitch to brands and how we build brands over multi-years.
And isn't it hard to get a brand to focus on that one thing because they all, so often want to be so many things to so many people, and they're trying to say, yeah, Jason, but we also solve this problem, and we also do this, and we also do that. How do you get your clients to that singular narrative focus of that one thing, even that one word? What do they stand for?
I mean, it's through a lot of workshops and working with them and trying to have them help land it with us so that they're part of coming up with it. But we give them a lot of examples of brands that have done it right and then brands that haven't done it right. And when those brands are constantly changing their story or constantly changing that one thing, those are the brands that are least successful. And when those brands that are clear and consistent, it comes back in their stock price or their revenue numbers. And, in a crowded market, you need to be really clear and consistent. And you can't keep changing every year, every 2 years what the brand stands for because it confuses the consumer. And it also confuses the products you're making because you're not coming back to what the brand stands for. And if you're doing anything that's off that, you got to edit it out. So it's a journey. Like, I'm making it sound super simple. Like, all of our clients have that one word and they ladder up to it. But a lot of brands will come to us and they're trying to find that one thing. We'll help them find it. Or maybe they have that one thing and they've lost it. So we need to go back to it and try to be a good partner and filter out ideas or work that's happening across the portfolio and the company that we're working with and make sure that it is coming back to that one simple storyline.
We are often working with companies to do a lot of story workshops and whatever, and not so much in the branding realm, a little bit there, but this is just overall communication for sales, marketing, some branding, leadership development. And one of the things that we are always working on when we help people with their and, but, therefore, is this ABT narrative framework, is when they first draft them, Jason, they've got 2 or 3 or 4 different narratives going on, and we're like, no, what's that one thing you're solving for with this particular ABT framework that you're working on, on a subject matter? And there's this old biologist, Theodosius Dobzhansky, and he, back
I
in
love
the day,
that name.
Isn't it fantastic? He wrote a thesis that really shifted the paradigm on biology and theology and science. And he said in this renowned paperwork, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And we use that Dobzhansky template. Nothing in whatever you're trying to do makes sense except in the light of what? So you said Alaska Airlines. their whole narrative framework is around caring, right? So nothing in the Alaskan airline makes sense except in the light of caring. So how do we, communicate that? And it's just a great little template for people to use to write that down as they're trying to either sort out a message or even that overall brand narrative. What's that one thing? Use the Dobzhansky template. Nothing in X makes sense except in the light of Y.
Oh, I love that. That's great framework. And tell me more about the ABT framework that you use.
Oh, the and, but, therefore. Yeah. Well, it is. I learned it from my good friend, Dr. Randy Olson, who is a Harvard PhD evolutionary biologist, turned USC film school grad, produced 3 documentaries on climate change, global warming, but really now his life is dedicated to teaching scientists how to communicate their big ideas using Hollywood frameworks, primarily, I really should say solely, around the and, but, therefore. And I learned about it about a decade ago from Randy, and while I've helped him teach it in the science world, I've translated it to the business world. And it's this template that you can use. It's something that I wished I had learned in the 3rd grade. I mean, it's fabulous for branding. It uses the 3 forces of story of agreement, contradiction, and consequence. And is your statement of agreement. You are so-and-so. You identify your audience. You want this, and it's important to you because of this. But is a statement of contradiction, but you don't have it because of this. Therefore, is a statement of consequence. Imagine what a brighter tomorrow is going to look like when we help you get it by doing this. Set up problem resolution. So the best way to explain it, Jason, or the quickest way, agreement, contradiction, consequence. You want to start off with that aspirational first sentence. And I was doing some work with Home Depot, and one of their sales guys asked me, Mark, what's the shortest ABT you know? And I said, I got one for you. Here it is. You communicate and care, but bore. Therefore, tell a story. So you communicate, yes, I do, and care. You're absolutely right, I care. It's aspirational. It's that positive vision of tomorrow, and then you pull the rug out from underneath the limbic brain, basically, with that triggering word of but. But you bore. Therefore, that's the problem that we're going to overcome. Therefore, let me show you how to use storytelling to hack through the noise and hook in the hearts of your customers.
That's a great one. I love that. That's a super clear example. When I talk about storytelling, I use that, which I think is similar. I think yours is a bit better, but I use that classic structure of, the goal, then the obstacle, and then the resolution. And so the goal is what you're trying to achieve. You got to have that but. You got to have that tension. What's the obstacle? What's the problem? What's the issue? In your case, you say bore. Then you have to come up with how do we resolve that. And so that it's very similar, but I use that framework a lot, the goal, obstacle, and resolution. I guess that's
it's basically the same thing. Yeah. You're just using semantics here, just different words.
Yeah.
But set up, problem, resolution, but therefore provides the storyteller with the actual words to use, as I call them, sort of your storytelling buoys, right? So say you're sailing in, you're from the fog of sea, and you're trying to land this ship. So start with buoy number 1. What's that statement of agreement using that word and then that gets you a little bit closer to shore. But now you're coming up on the lighthouse and the rocks. Where's the contradiction and consequence? And therefore is what then lands you at the dock. So set up problem resolution. It's something that you can use to really focus that message. And then we use the Dobzhansky template on top of that. Once you get your ABT down, you say, okay, do we have a singular narrative? Let's put it through if this, then this, or nothing in such and such, the subject matter makes sense except in the light of this one word. So
I like that. And then your story cycle is kind of a more robust version of that?
It is. And I started with the story cycle. I mean, I learned it from Hollywood. Our son, Parker, was at film school at Chapman University from 2006 to 2010. And that's when I was running Park & Co. And we were struggling, quite honestly, in the digital realm. We couldn't quite figure it out. And so I told Parker to send me his books when he was done with them, since I was paying for them, and his lectures and whatever. And I learned a ton about Hollywood and screenwriting and Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, and that was my inspiration for the 10-step story cycle system, because I was like, oh my God, here is the key to really knowing your audience what journey they're on and what stories to tell them depending on where they are on that journey. But it all comes down to that singular focus. Now, the hero's journey, is a 12 to 17 step complex messaging framework. But it is absolutely broken down to an and, but, therefore. Act 1, where the hero's at home, he gets that call to adventure, and that is the and statement of agreement. The but then is that long Act 2. They go through all these trials and tribulations, test themselves and whatever, and then they come out of the other end, and the therefore in Act 3, therefore they return with the boon. Well, if you think about it, anytime a customer is buying something from you, they essentially are going through the hero's journey, are they not? They're in their ordinary world. They want something. You, as the brand, give them the call to action or the call to adventure. Come in and buy our product. They buy it. It may not work for them as they first thought, or they might, be frustrated by it. They go through a little bit of a learning curve with it, and then they come out of the other end and hopefully more enriched for buying your product or service. So it's the basic sentiments of the hero's journey. I boiled it down to the 10 steps of the story cycle system. To your point, Jason, is just to be able to provide a structure for brand story strategy creation.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love when you can break something down. And I think the story cycle is it's really kind of a brand arc based on a Hollywood template. Yeah.
Totally is.
I love that.
Completely is.
That.
And, I've used the 15 beats, Blake Snyder's 15 beats of story as he outlines in Save the Cat, which is really effective, but it's 15 beats. It's complicated. Even the 7 or 8 steps of the Pixar way is complicated for people, and I found that it all begins with the and, but, therefore. That is the foundation for everything because it builds your narrative intuition of setup, problem, resolution. And as legendary Silicon Valley marketer Christopher Lochhead said, nobody buys a solution unless they have an effing problem. So what's that singular problem? What's that singular solution? How are you there as a brand to help them win the day?
I love that. One quote that I always kind of come back to is psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who said, we have to always remember that the mind is a story processor, not a logic processor. And so when you have to persuade, which is what we're doing in all aspects of our daily life, which is a lot of what I talk about in the book, is, we're persuading, you're persuading your family to go on a vacation that you want to go on, or you're persuading your wife to move farther north and get away from Phoenix or whatever. We're like in this cosmic dance of persuasion all day long in our life and in business, and we're persuading consumers to want to buy our product, or people to want to work with us, whatever it might be. We're persuading all day long, and the best way to persuade is through stories, not through logic and data, which is what we've become so accustomed to in the sort of performance world of advertising today, which is all about numbers and results and stock performance for our investors. But really, the mind remembers stories. We don't remember the facts and figures. We remember stories, and stories resonate and they stick with us. So if you're building a brand, whether it's a personal brand or a company brand, the mind remembers the stories you tell. And you have to tell through story because that's how we process, that's how we remember. And so I always think about that Jonathan Haidt quote as how you talk to people and you talk to consumers is you have to do it through story because that's what's sticky. And logic and facts and prices and all the numbers, they kind of go in one ear and out the other, but the stories resonate. So I always think about that when we think about building brands.
And I forgot about Jonathan's quote. That is a great when the brain is not a logic processor, but a story processor.
Story processor, yeah.
In fact, Jason, I had him on the show a couple of years ago in show number 183, and he and I explored that very concept, and it was on the heels of his second book being published. So you might enjoy listening to that. I'm a big Jonathan Haidt fan as well.
How did you pull that number out of your cranium? 183.
Well, while you were talking, I was up searching.
All right. I'm like, he remembers every guest and every number from every show. Maybe the mind is a logic process. Yeah.
But
That's
the truth
amazing.
is, as a podcast host, you do a little bit of multitasking on this end when you're asking
Oh,
questions.
yeah, of course.
Well, let's talk about your new book,
Yeah.
The Art of Soulful Persuasion, and the 11 habits that you're talking about. That we won't cover all 11, but I would love for you to hit on some of the top ones that you think really work for people. And before we do that, I want to just set the stage a little bit more with your agency Mekanism. And you've got this concept of soul plus science. And that was really intriguing to me because with the business of story, I kind of flipped that. I talk about the applied science of storytelling that leads to its bewitchery. So the applied science and bewitchery of storytelling. Here are the frameworks you use, and here's how the impact it has on your audiences. You guys have flipped that a little bit with soul plus science. What's that about?
Yeah, so we really position the company around soul and science. It's what we stand for. And soul is a lot of what we've been talking about so far. It's really about what is the purpose for your company and your brand. Why does it exist? What is its reason for being? What is its origin story? What is it trying to accomplish in the world? And that's really the soul or the heart of the brand. And then the science, the way we look at science, is that can be the data and the insights that lead you to determine where you're going to go next. But it also is analyzing and tracking and measuring the work that you put out into the world. So when we think of soul and science, another way to say it is it's creative and performance. It's really about measurement, and which is so important today because CMOs have a couple years when they start a gig, and they got to show results. And at the same time, they have to show short-term results and quarterly gains. But to build a brand takes many years, and so they're fighting against, keeping their job by showing results and performance. But they also need to build brand for the long term. And so we use soul and science as the way to do that. And it all starts with knowing what your brand is. And that involves insights, looking at the past, looking at why the brand started, how it's differentiated, and then measuring the work you put out there. And you have your story cycle. We have something called the infinity loop, which is a 9-step process of how we build brands. And it's an infinity loop because once you put your work out there and you measure it, then you tweak it and you start the process again. And so it kind of is never ending. But that is really a process that we created, and it's all around this soul and science framework, which is the two parts of brand building today. And so that's really served us well. It's understandable, it's easy to explain, and there's a simple process we can do when we start with a brand. And people love a process. They love, your mind really needs to understand, okay, how's this going to work? It's not just a bunch of people going in behind closed doors and coming up with a wild creative idea. I need to know what the process is to deliver what I'm trying to accomplish. And so that's been really useful for us.
Have you heard of Bob Hoffman out in the Bay Area, the ad contrarian?
No.
Oh, man, you got to follow him. He's got a weekly newsletter that is just absolutely classic. Bob has been in the advertising world forever. He's now retired, but he is
Did he have Hoffman and Lewis? Was that his agency?
I don't
Do you have an agency?
know.
Okay.
I don't recall. He worked for a couple different agencies and head them up. I don't know that he was owner of any one of them, but he was the general manager and directed them. Came up as a copywriter and is a brilliant writer. And he just talks a lot about the trials and tribulations of the ad world, especially the digital world. And he just wrote a post, and I had him on my show. Now, this one I have not searched, so I don't remember what the number, but it was about 2 months ago. Bob was on my show, and I'll have it in the show notes. And he talked about, because I'm a big believer in what you're talking about, soul and brand purpose and whatever, and he kind of dismisses that in some respects. Not all respects, but some respects. He goes, really, advertising success is about fame. How can I get my client's mug and brand logo and whatever in front of as many of their right customers as often as possible to build fame? And fame overcomes everything. And then he will kind of poo-poo brand purpose. Like, when was the last time you really walked into a store and said, hey, I'm going to buy that milk because those are free-range cows out there. He says,
Right.
A very small minority of people actually do that. But I'm like you. I do believe that a brand has to show up with soul and purpose, if nothing more than to attract and retain the best talent, because they are working and feel like they're working for something much bigger than just selling something. What's your position on that? I think I know what it is, but how would you argue, I guess, Bob Hoffman, that says brand purpose isn't that big deal. It all just comes down to fame.
Well, I think fame is the end goal, but you want to be fame, you want to have fame, you don't want to have infamy, right? And so I believe he's right in that it is about fame. And I think purpose today gets misconstrued into meaning that you're making the world a better place. It doesn't have to be that. Like your brand purpose doesn't have to be, the soul of your brand doesn't have to be altruistic at all. But it has to be, you have to exist for a reason, to make, products that do X, to help people accomplish Y. There has to be a higher order to your brand. That's what a brand is, versus just selling, apparel or deodorant or ice cream, whatever it is. You need to have a higher reason for being. That just doesn't have to be we're fighting climate change, or, we're helping healthcare workers, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be some feel-good notion, but it has to be a reason why the brand is there. And I don't think you can create fame without some powerful emotion behind the brand. And you can't tell stories without an emotional jumping off point either. So, I mean, I hear what he's saying in the aspect of no one cares if you're what cows the milk came from, or your process in creating it. That's one part of it that I agree with him on. That's important maybe for some brands, not important for all brands. But the reason why your milk exists and why you put it out there and package it the way it is and why it's named a certain thing and where it comes from, that's important. That to me is an important aspect of why you exist. It also, you need to motivate employees at the company as well. There's internal marketing you need to do. And then when the customer decides between your milk and the 5 other gallons of milk on the shelf, there has to be some reason for it. It can't just be because I've heard of it and it's famous. There has to be some other connection point for the customer, I believe.
Some other intrinsic value associated with it. And that comes
Exactly.
through understanding what that is. Alaska Airlines, we care. So in all your communication, I suppose that comes back to that touch point, right? We got to somehow demonstrate that we are this caring airline in everything we communicate.
That's exactly right. I mean, you've nailed it. And I think you can have a big corporation, you can have Disney standing for magic, but they're all about the money, right? They're all about like selling and building a business. They're not necessarily doing something for the greater good. They're running a business, but the thing you're buying is this storytelling, this magic. You're going to transport me somewhere else because I'm, connecting with the Disney brand and the characters and the rides and the entertainment. And so, yeah, I do believe you need that one thing. And that one thing, that soul, will often lead to fame, will often lead to the Bob Hoffman outcome. But I don't think you can skip that step of knowing, what that reason for being is.
By the way, that show is Bob Hoffman. He's episode number 361. And no, I didn't have it memorized. I did just go and multitask on you.
That's impressive, man.
I really need to get a list of them. I mean, if I would wake up, I would get a list of my shows.
I don't know how you've done that. I don't know how you've done that many shows. That is incredible.
That's what everybody says. But, Jason, there are folks just like you all around the world that are using stories in different ways. And people say, do you ever repeat yourself? And I go, no. The most amazing thing is how story is completely embedded in our personal and professional lives, of course. We are Homo sapiens, so we are basically storytelling monkeys. And we come about it from a lot of different angles, yet you will still see this underlying superstructure story the same. beginning with the and, but, therefore. You've got a 9-step infinity loop process. I've got the 10-step story cycle system, which I bet if we put them side by side, we would see amazing similarities in the characteristics of it. And so I get a chance to talk to a lot of interesting people that approach story from a number of different ways. What I'd like to cover with you next, then, is your book. So you've got this out, and let's talk about this because so many of us really want to increase our persuasion, increase our influence, essentially increasing the impact that we do have in the world in whatever way, shape, or form that is important to us. And it does come down to communicating and how well you do that and using these frameworks to be able to hook into folks' minds to really get them to understand what you stand for. So you, in your book, outline these 11 habits. At the top of your list there, what's one of your favorite habits that you communicate to your customers, your colleagues, whatever, and then really see that impact almost immediately?
Yeah, so really the Soulful Art of Persuasion is about brand building, it's personal brand building and business brand building. So it's kind of woven a lot of work that I do with clients and how I've built a business. But also it can be applied to people on a personal level because, as we talked about earlier, persuasion is something we do in our personal lives and we do in our business lives when we're selling. But I can talk about the 11 habits, but I'd love to pull back kind of one step broader before I go into that, which is the book's really based on 4 principles. And those 4 principles, and then there's these habits underneath those principles. But those 4 principles are really, the first one is original. And that's really where I talk about the power of storytelling and understanding who you are, because we're all individuals, we're all unique. We have 99.9% of the same DNA, but there's 0.1% that makes us different. And that 0.1% is what individually we should be highlighting, just like you would do with a brand, just like you would do with a company. You got to highlight that uniqueness, that spark, that originality. And that's sort of principle 1. Principle 2 is about being generous, both as a brand and as an individual, having a generous spirit and giving things away to people. That's also a part of being persuasive. The third principle is being empathetic, which is really understanding the other person you're trying to persuade. And it can be, for a brand standpoint, really understanding your customer or your consumer. And then the fourth principle is soulful, which is a bit about doing something bigger on a higher emotional level than just transactional. And so those are the 4 principles, and then there's habits underneath each of those. And maybe one thing I could do is maybe talk about one for each principle as an example of those habits. But the first habit under original is, I'll talk about one of the habits under original, which is a bit of a game changer. And it's this notion of never be closing. So instead of ABC, it's NBC. And it's thinking about not thinking in a, how do I get this sale, or how do I get this one thing that I want to happen. It's really playing the long game. And it's thinking about every touch point you have with someone, whether it's me on your show, whether it's you interacting with a listener, whether it's you pitching to a brand that you might work with, but it doesn't maybe land. You keep that network. It's all about building that network. And it's about playing the long game and thinking that if I'm not closing right now, I still made a connection. I still put a lot of time into this pitch or making this connection. So I'm gonna nourish that connection. I'm gonna keep that connection going over time. And it might end up somewhere down the road, or it might be a referral, or it might be another jumping off point. But this mental shift, that's a big shift of thinking about never be closing versus always be closing when you're trying to persuade. And that's a big shift that I think a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs especially, maybe don't do. They think about it as, this didn't happen, I'm on to the next one. But you've already invested this time into this connection. don't let it go to waste.
Jason, do you have an example of that for you in your world where you've really seen that, or maybe was really underscored to you earlier in your career, that it's about helping, not selling, and through that help, through that added value giveaway, that you're building that trust and ultimately a potential client?
Yeah, I mean, I have countless ones I can think of. I call it the $1 million hoodie because I met this guy at a conference who worked at Ben & Jerry's, and he ran digital at Ben & Jerry's. His name's Jay Curley, and I met him. I think we were speaking on a panel together, and I thought he was a really cool guy. Really, really liked him. Made a connection with him. I sent him a bunch of Mekanism swag as a thank you, like, hey, it was great to meet you. And he worked in Vermont. The office is in Burlington, Vermont. And he wore this Mekanism hoodie, and he wore it because it's cold. You know, they keep the office kind of frigid in there. And he wore this Mekanism hoodie, has our logo on it. And they were deciding, this was maybe like 10 years ago, they were like, oh, we need a new agency. And he had compiled his list of agencies, and I had stayed in touch with him, never really selling him, but just kind of making the connection. And he was making the final list, and he looked down at his hoodie, and he's like, oh yeah, these guys, I'll throw them in the mix. And we ended up winning the business, and it was a client we had for about 8 years, and it was obviously Ben & Jerry's, one of the best brands in the world. And it really came down to this never be closing, but just making a connection turned into 8 years of business by, sending a nice note and a hoodie. And that story to me is a really great story of, it wasn't, hey, one day I'm going to win Ben & Jerry's. It was like, oh, I met this guy who was cool. I really liked him, and I just want to stay in touch with him. And lo and behold, the hoodie came in of some use because he was cold in his office, and when he, on that one day, looked down and saw our logo, and he threw us in the mix, and then we got a client out of it.
And so, that was, did you say from the first contact with him, sending him the swag to the time you landed the business was 10 years?
No. This happened like 10 years ago. We had the client for 8 years, but it was probably like, a year and a half later, maybe 2 years later, that we ended up pitching the business.
You're playing the long game. It's a complex sale, and you just happen to be there as a confidant, probably providing a lot of added value to this guy, plus the warm hoodie and an ice cream shop. I mean, it's got to be cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Jerry's,
right? So yeah,
right.
just a mind shift that I think people can make in playing the long game, and not even saying, oh, I'm going to get this client one day, but he's connected. He knows folks. I'm sure I helped him out over the years with contacts, and I think that idea is really useful. And that's one habit that you can always mentally shift about. This is never be closing. If I'm going into a pitch and I don't win it, that doesn't mean I've lost it and I'm on to the next one. It means, well, how do I stay in touch with these people and this contact? And maybe there's one person in particular you made a connection with. How do I stay in touch and not let this relationship drop to zero? And I think that's a big mental shift that's been really useful and hopefully useful to your listeners.
All right, let's go to the next principle. Be generous as both a brand and an individual, so both in your personal and professional life.
Yeah, so when I think of generous, I think of this idea of a lot of these principles I had to learn over time. They weren't natural to me. And so I wasn't born a natural, generous person. And when I started my business, I would really hoard my contacts and my connections. And I thought that was sort of the game. If I had these contacts and another agency didn't, I was one step ahead. And then I started to realize over time, my world got very small. And I started, whenever someone came to me for advice or contacts or relationship, I would make that connection freely and I wouldn't really think too hard about it. And that opened up a whole new world of possibilities. And so when I think of generous, I really think about this idea of giving away advice, giving away counsel, giving away your time, and really nurturing those relationships and having a generous spirit which I had to habitually learn by practicing it over time, whereas before I was much more guarded and closed off, and I would say no more than I would say yes. And when I changed that thinking, the business really opened up.
You move from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance. It's like, man, I'm here to connect. I'm here to just work with whoever I can, whether they're a competitor or not. And that actually throws your competition off the scent a little bit. They're like, wow, why is Jason being so open on this? We did something here in Arizona when we ran some ads. It was, certainly a self-serving Park & Co. agency ad, but the call to action was, if you don't call us, at least talk to another local agency about your work. It was meant to be, keep the business in town. And then we sent them to a landing page with not only our contact information, but 20 other agencies in town. So if you don't work with us, at least work with some of these folks.
I love that idea.
We had great response from it, and had a lot of fun. And some of the other agencies, one guy called out and says, man, what are you doing? Someone told me that you were promoting our agency, and then I go and see what you're doing. He goes, this is genius. But it was to that same sort of concept of, let's just be generous out there, and we'll get our due, right?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to you in...
1 second, my microphone just fell off. 1 second.
No problem.
That's hysterical. Our son, Caden, who produces our show, he's an audio engineer in Vegas, and he was here over the Thanksgiving weekend, and he and I were producing some new music, some new opening music for the show. And so I was using this microphone, put it down on an amp that he could play his bass on, and I think I loosened the C-clip on it, and everything just went boom.
Oh, my God, that's amazing. I love that. I can't wait to hear that new opening music.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. So I think we've covered the generosity thing. How about number 3, that principle of empathy?
One big part of empathy for me is collaboration, and really trying to, when you think about storytelling or working with a brand, think about how do you collaborate closely with the client that you're working with versus having the old school mentality of, give us your problem, we're going to go away and solve your problem, we're going to come back to you with the answer. But the imperative of collaboration really makes you a better persuader and a better ultimate seller because you're working with that client. So we have a phrase here at the agency that is, all of our clients are geniuses. They're smarter than we are. They know their brand. And when you start with that idea of assume genius, assume your clients are geniuses, that it creates a much better work environment, and it opens you up to collaboration versus I've worked at other agencies in the past where the mindset was we have to save the client from themselves. They don't know what they're doing. We need to step in and solve this and save them versus this idea of collaboration. And we're going to approach it in an empathetic way where we're going to come together and solve this problem together. That helps you sell ideas so much faster and creates much more longevity for that relationship than going away and trying to do it on your own and then coming back with the answer. So it's a way to set yourself up for partnering right off the bat, even during a pitch process with the client. So that collaboration imperative is part of the empathetic principle. And so other parts of being empathetic is, it's not me, it's us, using we and not I, and, really shifting your mindset to thinking about it as a collaborative group effort. And that's a big principle both in the company and when we're working with companies.
One of my transitions, one of the major, motivations for transitioning out of the Park & Co. agency world into what I do now is when I was studying story and we started the story cycle system, and I was learning a lot more about the power of these frameworks and then demonstrating their power with the clients, they would then say, can we have you come in and teach our internal team how to do this? Can you teach our C-suite how to use these frameworks so that we can communicate better? can you basically teach us everything you've learned about story? And I said, absolutely. So I would come in, I would teach, and of course they would pay for it, so it became a revenue-generating thing. But I'm curious if you've ever had this in your world, Jason. I had so many agencies and even some people inside our own agency of like, oh my God, Park, why are you giving away the magic? Why are you teaching them? They won't need us. They'll just go and do it on their own. Aren't you afraid of losing business by being too open with your customers? And I said, no, it's quite the exact opposite. If we can educate them about how to do a better job with their storytelling and their communications, it's going to amplify the impact of our work. And you build additional trust and value with your customer because now we're not just a vendor, but we're someone coming in and actually becoming a coach for their people. And so I found that it really embedded us in the client even that much more by giving away everything we knew or, selling them everything we knew about storytelling, but it built our business. It didn't detract from it. And my big thing was I realized I enjoyed coaching and teaching way more than I did running an ad agency, thus my transition into the business of story. But I'm curious if you've had that same sentiment delivered to you by your colleagues or even your competition of like, Jason, you don't want to give away too much because they won't need us anymore.
Yeah, I definitely do not subscribe to that. I think you give, we put on our website, we have our process right on our website. We talk about, we have case studies, examples of how we've done it. Just because you're giving away that story cycle or our infinity loop, that doesn't mean people are going to pick it up and either want to do it or know how to do it. But you're telling them, hey, there's no big secret here. This is the way we do it. We hire talented people that collaborate and can work through it. And if you want to work with us to do that, great. If you want to try to do it on your own, great. But we're here for you if you want to work with us. And I think that is that's just paramount because in today's world, there's a million systems you can go online and find. So you might as well put it out there, show examples in concrete ways that you've done it, and help your clients be as smart as they can because that's only going to lead to good things down the road.
Now, your fourth principle we've actually talked a lot about already, and that's soulfulness, finding that purpose for the brand. Is there one or two habits in there that people can be doing to help find their purpose? Because, sometimes I'll get people or brands say, I know we're supposed to have a purpose, but I don't know what it is. How do you go about them? Or what's a habit that people can find what that authentic soulfulness is for them?
When I think about soulfulness also, and I think about your personal brand, also I'll start with the personal brand. I think we all, and this is looking at purpose as a higher order, going sort of on the anti-Bob Hoffman thing. This is looking at every person, I think, should have a thing or soulfulness that they strive to do that's greater and outside of themselves. So something that's bigger. So, for example, from our agency, we do a lot of pro bono work to combat sexual assault on college campuses, fight hate and racism, fight against those things, gender equality. So we do a lot of pro bono work that helps use our advertising skills, but does those skills at no cost or at low cost in order to make the world a better place. And any individual can do this on their own, and I think it makes you a more persuasive person. One way to do that is to simply it's a very simple exercise. You take 3 things that you're good at on one side, one column, and then 3 things that you care about in the world on the other column. And you stare at that list long enough, you're going to figure out a way to take one of your skills and one thing that you care about in the world and combine them to add a little soulfulness into what you do on a regular basis. So you might be a great piano player. See that piano behind you? And you might care about underprivileged kids, and you might say, oh, well, I could do 2 hours a week. I'm going to do lessons for underprivileged kids that don't have access to take piano lessons. It could be a simple idea like that. It could be teaching your story cycle idea to future marketers, at no cost as an idea. So whatever it is, you have plenty of skills and you have other things in the world you care about and audiences that you care about. How do you do that one thing? And it doesn't have to be a massive lift. It doesn't have to be doing free ads, pro bono work. It doesn't have to be as big as that, but it can be a small thing that you do on a personal level. And it makes you more persuasive and more of an inspirational person. And it's got a boomerang effect where it makes you feel much better about your life and your pursuits and putting your skills to good use.
I really like that exercise. So you got a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle, left side, write down 3 things you're good at. Or do you even have to be good at them? Can't you be something under development? 3 things that really interest you.
3 skills you have, right?
3 skills, yeah.
Maybe you're a mediocre chess player or slightly above average cook. But we all have some skills, right? 3 skills that you're competent at. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 things and 3 skills that you're working on, and then 3 things you care about outside of those skills. How can you then find maybe that theme, that singular narrative between 1, 2, or 3 of those skills and something that you could be giving back or helping people with or whatever?
Makes you more inspirational, and it brings a lot of soul back into your life because you're doing something and you're applying things that you've learned, and maybe there's skills that you've had that have you haven't employed in a while. Maybe there's skills that have atrophied or you haven't used them in any way, and this is a way to bring them back as well. So it kind of has a multiplier effect.
I love it. Well, let's wrap up by letting people know where can they find your book, where can they learn more about your work, Jason, and that over at Mekanism. Where do we send folks?
Yeah, you can go to Mekanism.com, Mekanism.com. I have a website, thesoulfulart.com, where you can learn more about the book and more about me. And then, if you're inclined to purchase the book, Amazon's probably the best way to buy it.
Awesome. I really appreciate you coming in and spending some time with us today on the show, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really a blast.
Yeah, it's fun because I feel like we're a little bit kindred spirits, having been in the ad world for as long as we both have. You ran your agency and just recently sold it to a Canadian holding company, as I understand it, in June of this year, right?
Yeah, just 5 months ago, yeah.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That's 17 years is a long time in the advertising world, trying to run an agency, keeping everybody happy, finding and retaining the best talent. And I guess it really comes down to you guys had your purpose. What do you stand for? What is Mekanism? What's the one word you all stand for?
I mean, beyond soulfulness, I think that's what we stand for. We're all about being soulful. And that is helping brands discover their soul and telling that story to customers, and then trying to run a soulful company where we care about our employees and we try to also do some good in the world. That's really, if I had one word, it would be soulful.
That's awesome. Folks, if you like what you heard today, please share this episode with your friends, families, colleagues, bosses, customers, whomever, where you feel like, finding that purpose and then being able to communicate it very effectively in that singular brand narrative is what's going to lead you to success. Well, this is a great jumping off show for you. And definitely check out Jason's new book, The Art of Soulful Persuasion. Finally, and Jason, this is for you too. If you want to learn more about the and, but, therefore, you can take our online course. Just go to businessofstory.com/ABT. In 3 20-minute modules, I'll teach you how to use the and, but, therefore, and everything from brand story development to sales and marketing to using it to get your kids to eat their peas, for crying out loud. So just check it out over at businessofstory.com/ABT. And until next week, when we'll have another amazing story artist right here for you like Jason, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.